Good afternoon. Welcome to Preservation Connecticut series talking about preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm happy to be your host today for our fourth program of 2022. Today we have the pleasure of chatting with Deborah Gaston, Cathy Labadia, and Todd Levine from the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office on efforts to protect the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Connecticut. But before we start the discussion, I would like to take a moment to share information about Preservation Connecticut. Preservation Connecticut is the statewide private nonprofit historic preservation organization founded in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation to protect, promote, and preserve the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut's communities. We are statutory partners with the State Historic Preservation Office, and we are supported by our members, donors, private foundations, and with broad support for over the last 4 decades, we have successfully championed the protection of remarkable community assets all over the state by leveraging funding, advocating, forming partnerships, and promoting stewardship. Our office is on Whitney Avenue in Hamden, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Shown here, it's the Eli Whitney boarding house built in 1827 to house workers for Eli Whitney's factory, and it has served as Preservation Connecticut's headquarters since 1989. We have a staff of 9 preservation professionals and an active board of 21 preservationists from around the state. Staff listed here are always available to assist with inquiries. Christopher Wiegren is our Deputy Director. Contact Chris for information on historic preservation easements, our acclaimed bi-monthly newsletter, Connecticut Preservation News, our newly launched Olmsted in Connecticut Landscape Survey Project, or to arrange book talks for his recently published book, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places. Renee Trubert, Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. Contact Renee for information on redevelopment of historic industrial sites and historic tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our Development and Special Projects Manager. Jordan manages our communications and outreach to members through social media and email, receives and monitors demolition notices from municipalities, and prepares historic tax credit applications and nominations to State and National Register of Historic Places. Kristen Hopewood is our Development Assistant, and she manages all of the inquiries that come through our website, provides member services, arranges special events, and is the editor of our Historic Properties Exchange, a free listing of threatened historic properties. And finally, our team of circuit riders, Brad Scheid, Mike Farino, Stacy Vero, and new to the team, archaeologist Stefan Danchuk. Our circuit riders provide immediate assistance to homeowners, developers, municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations and museums, historic district commissions, and much more, with an array of preservation technical assistance, including community organizing, prioritizing maintenance and repairs, historic designations, and funding. These weekly chats have served as a meaningful way for us to connect with continue our mission during the pandemic. We've been able to connect with the public and hear what's on your mind, providing more than 40 programs and reaching an audience of about 1,000 participants. During today's program, please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions or ask questions directly at the end of the presentation, or of course, contact us afterwards for a call or a site visit. And just a quick preview for next week. We hope you'll join us for History from Below, Discovering Benedict Arnold's New Haven house site. And anytime you have suggestions for programming, we would love to hear your thoughts and let us know. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues from the State Historic Preservation Office, Cathy, Todd, and Deborah. Welcome. So pleased to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here. So I'm just going to say I'm Cathy Labadia. I will be starting this presentation, but I am joined by my colleagues, Todd Levine and Deborah Gaston, and I will let them introduce themselves as they come up to speak. Oops, I think is my screen coming up? Okay, good. So I am the staff archaeologist at the State Historic Preservation Office, and I see that I've come to the end instead of the beginning. Okay, you're going to get a quick preview. There we go. Sorry, I didn't expect there to be technical difficulties after I was giving some great technological advice when we first started.
We haven't figured out how to do the smooth handoff yet. I think every program.
No problem. So this is what we're going to be talking about today is kind of how the State Historic Preservation Office got involved with preserving Meadowwood. And it started for me, I'm going to, start from my perspective on it about 3 years ago when we were moving offices. And I came across this box in the upper left-hand corner. It's just a typical gray archival box, and you could barely read it, but the letters were MLK, and then there's a kind of a small junior there. And I saw that box and I thought, MLK, it only means one thing to me. And when I opened up the box, it was filled with newspaper clippings, photographs, reports, and I was astounded at what I was uncovering because I am a Connecticut native. I am involved with a lot of history groups, and yet this story was unknown to me. And I'm embarrassed to say that it was unknown to me because I think it's just an amazing connection. And, when I opened it up, probably, the first thing I came across is the research project paper that you see there, which was written by your own circuit writer, Stacy Vero. And it was kind of my first entree into what I realized was a much larger story. And actually several studies that our office had previously funded in terms of migrant labor within the tobacco industry. But Stacy's paper in particular, research project, focused on this area of Meadowwood in Simsbury. And what became apparent is that Coleman Tobacco, or Colbro Tobacco at that time, had a relationship with Morehouse College to provide students an opportunity to work during the summers and earn money to help pay their college tuition. And the program lasted for about 15 years. And the most prominent person who came through that program was Martin Luther King Jr. at a young man of 15. So before he actually began going to Morehouse College, he came here to work in the summer of 1944, we know for sure, because he wrote these 5 letters home. And these 5 letters that he wrote home during that year are incredibly important because they show this insight into a young man's mind of how he's thinking about the world, what is things that are surprising him about the way the world is. And I think knowing the trajectory that his life follows, what influence that had. And so, while as a historian, you can make those conjectures, I think what really seals it is when he applies to theology school, there is a question on the application that says, why are you applying here? And his response to that is, I got my calling to the ministry in the summer of 1944. That's his time in Connecticut, when he says that he had an inescapable urge to serve society, that he felt a sense of responsibility that he could no longer escape. And so I think that now puts it into Martin Luther King Jr.'s very own words. And still, on that application, most of his time in Connecticut had been forgotten to history. And it really only came to light when his family had turned over his papers to be incorporated into an autobiography of his life. And it's kind of an unusual autobiography because it's not penned actually by Dr. King, but somebody else penned it, however, relying heavily upon interviews with other people, quotes that he had put into writing. And when these papers first started to come to light and the stories putting together was the late 90s, 98, 99. And somebody working on it had called the Hartford Courant to say, hey, did you ever know of this connection? And the Hartford Courant in 1999 ran an article about it. And I think everybody was shocked. Like I said, it was something that was lost to history. And soon after that, some Simsbury High School students created a video, a 15-minute video, and it will surely outshine any presentation I can give to you today. And it's fantastically done, and put research effort into this short documentary about Martin Luther King Jr.'s time here. And that sort of spawned another round of articles and interest in the property. But again, it wasn't really moving out much outside the community of Simsbury. And I will say that those students, that teacher who first started that, is still continuing to work with his students doing research to this day. So it is still very much alive in Simsbury. And so from my perspective, from the State Historic Preservation Office, I thought, wow, this is an amazing story. I'm really interested in knowing more. And, Stacy's report was helpful because for our office, we are always about place-based preservation. And, one of the things that was in there is in the bottom right, you can see a photograph of the dormitory where King likely stayed on fire. It was used for training purposes by the town of Simsbury in 1983. So, it's a great moral of you can't see history. And I am sure if the connection was known back then, it likely would not have been used for fire practice. But that's why it is important to do research about places that otherwise to the eye may not be high style. So I saw that picture and I thought, oh, geez, it's unfortunate that we lost that. Well, what else is left? That's what I really wanted to know from my preservation perspective. So the first thing I did is I pulled up an aerial image, and on that aerial, I could see it's still tobacco farms and fields. And I thought, wow, this is great. Maybe there are other resources out here, and this could be a good preservation effort. So the next thing I went to do was to look at the town records to see, well, who owns this property? And then I quickly became aware of this juxtaposition between these open fields that I'm seeing in the aerial and all of these roadways laid out. And, when I would click on them, they were still owned by Culbro Tobacco, but clearly something was being planned there. And then I found out about some other involvement by our office. In 2009, the Meadowwood residential development was approved. It did have a 20% affordable housing component to it at that time. But from 2009 until about 2019, when I became involved, nothing had been done on the property. So I had reached out to the town and just, asked their town assessors and tax office, what was the status of it. And the project never took off from that point. And I know that there has been some discussions about the Meadowwood preservation, stopping affordable housing. And I want to be abundantly clear that even before the approval in 2009, there was another 10 years invested in trying to have some affordable housing built in this area. And I'm a big proponent of affordable housing. This is not an issue of preservation thwarted something else. The truth of the matter is the real estate market changed. Affordable housing in this area, there's not access to walkable schools, restaurants, stores, and there's not even public transportation. So the fit for affordable housing, it was not a great fit to begin with. And I think that's part of why a developer, didn't really pick this up and run with it. And I can tell you that Coleman Tobacco was considering other development projects. So further down the road, there's a large solar field. And I know that they were also talking to a warehouse developer. So it is more likely it probably would have gone along one of those lines. So from my perspective, again, getting back to, how Shippo got involved in this is place-based preservation. Everything for us always begins with that national register. And so my idea was, man, this needs to be more than just Simsbury. This really needs to have a national spotlight shown on it. And so I applied to the National Park Service for one of their African American civil rights grants. And the grant was to do a multiple property documentation listing, where we have a context and cover statement about what the Park Service and their framework defines as the birth of the civil rights movement, and set up this context so that we can then individually list structures under it or update listings for properties that are already on the National Register. And what this context is really about is much larger than just Martin Luther King Jr., but this experience of all these Morehouse College students to get here. Because one of the things that consistently echoes in all of those, the things I found in that initial box, when people went out and tried to do some oral history and other information for articles that had been written by people who either were there at the same time as Martin Luther King Jr. or shortly thereafter, was this sense of freedom of coming to Connecticut where there was not state-sanctioned segregation. And I am not trying to gloss over and say, put on rosy-colored glasses, that Connecticut didn't have racial problems, because it certainly did. But I think when you view it from the perspective of these young people coming from a segregated South to Connecticut, and you can see in Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters the things that he writes home, you'll realize how influential it is. And I know a lot of people are interested in what is in those letters. When my turn is done, I will put some links in the chat where you can go so you can read them yourselves. But I just want to highlight a couple of the things that he describes so you can understand what his thinking was. And again, it's a thinking that was echoed by all these young students who came here. He would say things such as, talking to his father, on our way here, we saw things I had never anticipated to see. After we passed Washington, there was no discrimination at all, and the white people were very nice. We got to go to any place we wanted to and sit anywhere we wanted to. Such a thing that we take so for granted. And this young man's mind was something he never anticipated he could see. And another letter he wrote home to his mother, he said, "Yesterday we did not work, so we went to Hartford. We had a really nice time there. I never thought that a person of my race could eat anywhere we want. We ate in one of the finest restaurants in Hartford, and we went to the largest shows there." And King's autobiography, this was, they used another quote that he had, which was called the curtain being pulled down on his selfhood. And I just want to read this quote because it ends the first chapter of his autobiography. And he said, and written in his words, paraphrased, "After that summer in Connecticut, it was a bitter feeling going back to segregation. It was hard to understand why I could ride wherever I pleased on the train from New York to Washington, and then had to change to a Jim Crow car at the nation's capital in order to continue the trip to Atlanta. The first time that I was seated behind a curtain in a dining car, I felt as if the curtain had been dropped of myself. I could never adjust to the separate waiting rooms, separate eating places, separate restrooms, partly because the separate was always unequal, and partly because the idea of separation did something to my sense of dignity and self-respect." I think laying it out there, and again, these are feelings and sentiments that are iterated over and over and over again by other people who went through the same experience as King. So that's kind of what the context will lay out. And, I know most of you are familiar with Preservation CT's work. The idea with listing on the National Register and getting these other properties identified is so that they can be opened up to funding, additional interpretation, as well as, stricter preservation penalties for their unreasonable destruction. So it was with, applying for that grant that we ended up getting a lot more publicity again, and my name got attached to it. And that is how I met some people from the Trust for Public Land who I cannot say enough good things about, because without them, I can guarantee you this preservation effort would not have happened. And so Honor Lawler from there happened to read the article, saw my name, gave me a call and said, you know, we've been working on this more from a land conservation issue. And she wanted to talk about what the historic connections were and what we knew. And so we kind of forged a relationship. I'm, happy and proud to say that Shippo was able to make a small contribution to the acquisition of the property and additional contribution to its future preservation. But all of these agencies were pulled together. The Trust for Public Land was able to pull together this private, public, municipal, state, national level involvement in helping to purchase this property so that it would not become a warehouse or another solar field, but that could be a place where we can honor and respect what really became a big inspiration for King. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Todd Levine, to talk about what the next steps are at this property. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy. I'm Todd Levine. I'm an architectural historian for the State Historic Preservation Office. I'm also the coordinator for the Connecticut Freedom Trail, and I'm the grant administrator for our Good to Great grant, which is the funding source that Cathy just mentioned. I also used to work at Preservation Connecticut when it was Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, and I was the director of Historic Barns in Connecticut. I love barns, and I think a lot of people love barns. And one of the things that was really important to me with this project, besides the story of Martin Luther King that a lot of people just frankly don't know about, is that we have an opportunity to save some of our endangered tobacco sheds. So when this came up, even 3 years ago, there was, with the photo you saw in the first slide, there was 6 sheds on this site right here, and then there were 3 on the other. Now we are down to only 5 of those. We lost 3 on the site where Martin Luther King worked, and then on the other field we lost 1. There's only 2 left. So one of the major components of this project will also be the stabilization of these tobacco sheds. When people think of Connecticut, a lot of people have this iconic thought of what is that cultural landscape, and for a lot of people, it's our barns. That big red barn on the hill. For folks who've traveled, and flew out of Bradley, when you came home, you saw that field of tobacco sheds. And what's there now? It's not tobacco sheds anymore. And there's a real feeling of loss there. So we're excited to have this opportunity to be working with Trust for Public Land and the municipality to preserve these remaining barns. The tobacco shed is one of those perfect form follows function building types. Everything about the tobacco shed was, for curing tobacco. The exterior sheathing wasn't just used to protect the interior, it was used for venting, for the curing of tobacco. The interior structure wasn't just used to keep the building up, it was used to hang the bunches of tobacco for curing. So it's one of those agricultural buildings that are really special. And another thing that's really special about these particular ones is, in this picture you can see in charcoal, the names of the Morehouse students who worked here. So one of the barns has all these amazing names of the folks that they would just sign their name when they went and worked the fields and they were working in these tobacco sheds. So what we're going to do is we're going to stabilize these barns, and then we're going to have an exhibit. So these will be open to the public, maybe not the interior, it might be an exterior exhibit, but we're really excited for this next step. So how are we going to get to that next step? Well, the first thing we need to do is stabilize these barns. So we have some money from the grant, the Good to Great grant, to stabilize them. The municipality is actually coming to Shippo for one of our survey and planning grants, which will be used for drawings and specs for the engineers to stabilize it properly, with the possibility of one of these barns being able to be entered so that folks can actually see the handwritten signatures of the Morehouse students who worked there. The next step after we get those drawings will be to, again, the municipality is going to come back to the state for one of our historic restoration fund grants, so that we can add more state investment into the preservation and ultimate celebration of this place. We're going to be working with the community on the development of the exhibit. As Cathy mentioned, when we were, developing this, those 5 letters really are one of the most important parts about, the retrospect of Martin Luther King Jr.'s time in Connecticut. And we really wanted to highlight those. And we were talking initially about, we have those 5 tobacco sheds on the site. We were going to, blow up those letters and attach them one to each shed. But now we've lost some of those sheds. So we're going to kind of take a step back as we evaluate, with the help of the community, on how best to share this story. So there'll be another grant from our office for a charrette that will, bring in folks from Morehouse College students, folks who work the fields, and also community members on how they want the exhibit to kind of represent this story. Cathy mentioned the grant to list the site on the National Register for Historic Places, but there's other ways to
Right.
Hello? Oh, I think someone's talking. There are other ways to honor historic sites, and one is the Connecticut Freedom Trail. So the Connecticut Freedom Trail documents and designates sites that embody the struggle for freedom and human dignity, and celebrates African American communities. And as soon as we learned about this place, our goal is to have this site as well as the other 150 sites that we have on the Freedom Trail added to the list for celebration. So we're really looking forward to that designation, along with the National Register designation, that really brings the level of recognition of this place to a higher level. The Connecticut Freedom Trail was established in 1995 by an act of the Connecticut General Assembly. So it's a law to have a Connecticut Freedom Trail here in the state. And in fact, when we learned about this project, about 3 years ago, we decided to add a new category to the Connecticut Freedom Trail. Our original categories were the Underground Railroad, the story of the Amistad, and then concepts of freedom. We added a new category, 20th century and civil rights movement, to it because of this site, and obviously others that we can better frame within the story of the Connecticut Freedom Trail with the proper categories. So, as I said, we're going to be doing a lot of things to kind of move this forward. There's other funding opportunities besides our own from the state and from this grant. We're going to be working with some mitigation money. So and other nonprofit donations to get these barns and tobacco sheds back in service so that they can be preserved and used as an exhibit space. So, and again, one of the things that are important is the charrette, is bringing the community together to learn about it. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand this over to my colleague at the State Historic Preservation Office, Deborah Gaston, who actually did indeed work on the tobacco shed fields when she was growing up. So I'll hand this over now to Deborah.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Deborah Gaston. I am the secretary for Shippo, and also the past secretary for the Connecticut Freedom Trail. And this whole saga has a personal and a professional connection to myself. My mother is from Georgia, and her middle name is Bell, B-E-L-L-E, so she is a true Southern belle. And myself and my brothers, our summers were spent in Georgia. And my grandparents, the land that they lived on, they owned their house, cornfields, cotton fields, as far as the eye can see. All kinds of fruits and vegetables my grandmother planted. So I, being the only girl, I was on her right hip in her gardens. And my mom was the oldest girl, and she moved up north here to Hartford back when she was 19. So, my great uncle was here, so she moved up with him and bought her gardening skills. She brought those here to Connecticut. And again, being the only daughter, I picked it up. I was always out in the yard digging holes or doing something, and she would yell at me, "Go out in the yard and cover up those holes." And as I told Cathy, I wanted to be an archaeologist because I just love digging and playing in dirt. And when it came up, I also went to school in Farmington. Inner city students from Hartford were bused out into the suburbs in a program that was modeled after a program in Chicago. It was called then Project Concern. This was in the late 60s, early 70s, and which is now CREC. And myself and my brothers were the first 10 inducted into the program. And my mom said, I was chosen first, but my mom said, they all go or no one goes. So we started to go to school there. And because of my love for gardening and that kind of thing, I took horticulture in grade school. And this area, Connecticut, is very rich in agriculture, and the soil and the dirt here is just, to me, I love to play in it. It's just very rich. So that sparked my interest in doing that. So as a teenager, 14 and 15 years of age, summer jobs were being advertised, and I saw the advertisement to work for Cobra Tobacco. And I told my mom, I definitely want to do this. This is just so cool. And she was like, you're not going unless your brothers go. Because she kind of liked to keep us all together. So I had two older brothers. And my oldest brother, he was a pretty boy. And he was like, I don't want to go out in the hot sun. So he eventually decided to go. So we were all working at Cobra Tobacco. He got fired. My middle brother, he also, he worked for a good period of time, but he got fired as well, trying to defend a young lady's honor. And I was the one who lasted. So some of the picture that Cathy has here working in the barn, when I saw it, it just brought back so many memories because I was a piece worker. I was a very fast sewer and learner. So the piece workers made more money. We worked on Saturdays. And in the Bloomfield area, as you see the barns there were barns as far as you can see. Some of them were gray, some of them were red. And as Todd mentioned, and there were students from Philadelphia. There were Mexican males, inner city children from Hartford, and also from the suburbs. So we all worked together, and everybody pretty much became friends. I mean, of course, there were disagreements, but for the most part, everybody pretty much got along, and I just thought it was a wonderful experience. And to Cathy, and working with Cathy and Todd to come across this information, I was very overwhelmed. And when they asked me to come on board, I was, of course I'm going to come aboard, because this was part of my life. And to know that Dr. Martin Luther King worked here in Connecticut on tobacco, just as I did as a teenager, around the same age. And he, because of the freedoms that Blacks had here at that time, he changed, what he wanted to do with his life, to become a minister and a civil rights activist, due to the fact he saw that the freedoms that Blacks had here, which I thought was very interesting. Also, segueing to being the secretary of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. The saga of the Amistad started, well, didn't start here in Hartford, but it ended here in Connecticut as the ship accidentally sailed into the New Haven harbor. And a few years ago, the president and vice president of Sierra Leone had came to Connecticut to dedicate the statue of Senke, which is in front of the New Haven Town Hall, and also one of the tombstones of the captives, which is on the Yale University property. And at the time, Cora Murray was my supervisor. She was African American female. And my job at the event was to take pictures. And I was so overwhelmed to see the Black Suburbans with the diplomatic flags. I mean, I had goosebumps, and it just kind of overwhelmed me to see, you know, the stature of men and women stepping out. And the vice president, he sat with the entourage. There were school children there. You know, the ceremony was awesome. And I was a little taken aback to see that there wasn't one news station there. So I called Channel 3, and they said, oh, we didn't know about that. And that was the end of it, but they never showed. But anyway, but as the dignitaries were speaking, the pastor for the Farmington Congregational Church got up to speak. And I said, oh, Farmington, I went to school in Farmington. So of course I tuned in more. And to find out that after the captives, the Mindy captives won their freedom at the old State House downtown, which is, I guess, was their courthouse at the time, the people in Farmington took them in, nursed them back to health, fed, clothed them, and gave them jobs until they were able to go back to Sierra Leone, free passage. And when that hit me, it just, I just started shaking, and the tears just started rolling down my face. Like, we went to Farmington all our lives, and they never taught us this. This was, I think I was like 39 or 40. First time I'm ever hearing about this, all these years of going to school in Farmington. And, you know, Cora asked me, are you okay? And I said, no, I am not okay, because this is not good. And I still keep in touch with a lot of my friends in Farmington. And I posted it on my Facebook page, and they were just so overwhelmed. They were like, you have the coolest jobs. Like, where do you work? So, you know, I was able to share that information with them. Again, this is history that, you know, I wasn't aware of. And a lot of history, even today, you know, is not being taught to children, is being pushed under the rug. I mean, history is history, and his story, this was Dr. Martin Luther King's story, and to push it under the rug, and, you know, you got to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. That makes the whole story complete. And, you know, to have this opportunity to, you know that a part of his life was also a part of my life was very overwhelming. And, you know, and I think it's excellent to try to save the barns in this area, so this information can be passed on and shared and treasured. Because, I mean, Dr. Martin Luther King was an icon, and to know that he got his start in what he became right here in Connecticut. I mean, I mean, just to imagine him walking down Main Street in an area where I grew up, that the Black churches on Main Street is not too far from where I grew up, on Earl Street in the north end of Hartford. And to know that he just freely walked around, and, you know, they had a good time and he enjoyed things, and also to document it and to tell his family, you know, the joys of what he was experiencing here, that's phenomenal. I mean, that's something that shouldn't be tucked away. It should be shared. And, you know, I'm glad that we have a hand in it. And Cathy, I'm glad you looked in that box and opened that box, and Todd, you know, for your love of barns, and also your connection to the Freedom Trail. I mean, it's been overwhelming. And like I said, to know that I'm a part of it and I can share, you know, this information with my friends, because like I said, whenever I post something, I know a lot of people, and they definitely take notice. I start getting messages, I start getting phone calls. And just recently, we were on Channel 30 with the Barnes, and my Facebook page just blew up. And then I started getting phone calls. I saw you on the news. That was you, girl. You always doing something. I'm like, so again, like I said, you know, to share this information and to, you know, treasure it, and for Connecticut to be a part of that history, I think is one of the greatest things ever, because like I said, Dr. Martin Luther King was an icon, and he changed a lot of people's lives, and the information that we weren't afforded, I know it would have changed our lives in the direction of schooling that we would have gone in if we had known about it. But now that we do, it's good to save it, treasure it, and share it. So, anyone have any questions for us?
Deb, I just want to say thank you for mentioning Cora, because she's the whole reason that 2003 report was done. And Cora Murray is the whole reason I think this all got started, really, and she deserves a tremendous amount of credit for that.
Thank you, Stacey. I miss her.
Well, thank you so much, Cathy, Todd, and Deb. I had two questions. One is the video that the Simsbury High School students made, is that available anywhere?
Yes, it is. I will pull up that link and put it in the chat for everybody.
Wonderful, thanks. And Todd, do you know the timing of the charrette that's being planned, and who is it open to? How do we find out about it?
Yeah, we're in the planning stage of planning for the charrette. So, I imagine if things go well, sometime in the next year is when we will be, the municipality will be beginning their outreach for it.
Great, thank you. Did anyone in the audience want to pose a question for our panel?
I posted one in the chat, and my question was, and I understand that this project is about the Morehouse students and Martin Luther King Jr., but I work at the Connecticut State Library, and we often get questions about tobacco field workers from Puerto Rico, and I'm just wondering if you know of any other projects with the tobacco fields.
This is Terry Wilson from the Avon Historical. Can I answer that?
Sure, go ahead, Terry.
I grew up in the 1970s and 80s across the street from the 3 barns, the now 2 barns. So growing up and watching the fields being worked, yes, there were people from many of the Caribbean islands who came up here and worked, because there were many different languages spoken, different dress worn, mostly men, I would say, in their 20s to their 40s. It was interesting because our houses right across the street were just made off the road. And I was a kid in my, early teens, playing with my girlfriends on the front lawn. And these guys would be walking up and down the street, working the fields. They never spoke to us, never said anything, but always just waved, very friendly, wore their different hats from their different places. So it really wasn't just, I don't know where the idea of just Puerto Rican came from, because I know I learned later when I joined the Simsbury Historical Society in the 80s that they were from many different Caribbean countries. Culpro reached far and wide. And then, of course, several of my friends in high school in the 70s worked the fields and got to know a lot of them. So they got to be very friendly with them. And we knew about the Martin Luther King connection way back in the 70s, because it was all talked about, because everybody knew that, but nobody really had records to prove it. And I see a couple of people from the Simsbury Historical on the call today, so maybe they remember some more of that better than I do. But yeah, it's an interesting thing, because it was a very diverse community that worked those fields, at least in the 70s and 80s. And oh, by the way, it was not mechanized. When we moved in there in 1970, those fields were plowed by mules, pulled by hand plows. People went up and down those fields, and then they hand tied all of the coverings, all of the strings, put up the sprinklers. It was a very laborious project to get the fields prepared. Mm-hmm. And the most really, I think, tragic, unfortunately, is the fact that they crop dusted on early spring mornings every April and May. On Sunday mornings, they would crop dust, and that dust would come into our houses and would give us headaches for days. And I've always worried about that. I don't know what we were exposed to, and that went on year after year. And so I believe there are some discussion of cancer clusters from that time around Simsbury. I wouldn't be surprised. I really would not be surprised. So anyway, for whatever that's worth, that is long answer to a short question. Sorry about that, but I have a tendency to do that because I've been watching this. And my mother still lives there and I visit her on a regular basis because she's homebound there. So I'm at the house all the time. And I was really sorry to see that one go down, the one barn go down recently. But I saw it was tilting and listing and looking like any moment, boom, it was going to go down. But, you know, and it did. So I'm sorry for that. But good job that you saved it because she always wanted a Kmart across the street. But, you know, that's not going to happen. Thank goodness.
Jenny, I have your email address. I just looked it up. I will send you, our office also funded a couple other research documents, one with the Simsbury Historical Society that are mostly related to West Indian populations coming to work for the tobacco industry. So I'll send those to you. So at the very least, you'll have a good bibliography.
That would be so wonderful because we do get people looking for research coming to the state library about this. And I've got some standard resources I give them, but I know that it's not all that's out there. And I also am recognizing that I'm kind of trampling on because that's not what this project and this presentation is on. I just, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thank you, Jenny. John Toomey, you have your hand raised. Go ahead, John.
Hi, I'm John Toomey. I'm a member of the Preservation Connecticut's advisory board. And regarding the question about other groups that were working in the tobacco fields, immigrants, back in November at the Old State House, a Dr. Fiona Vernal came and gave a nice long presentation talking about Morehouse College and about having people come from Jamaica, Haiti, and Puerto Rico back in the 50s and 60s. Somebody might want to contact the Connecticut Old State House to find out what where she is. And she gave a nice long presentation for the Hartford History Lecture Series. Now, Jane and Todd, I really appreciate the fact that this is being discussed about the barns and the preservation, because for all the years that I was on the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, I kind of championed the tobacco barns because my great-grandfather, Marcus Floyd, was the one who developed the process of shade-grown tobacco. My great-grandfather was the one who contacted Morehouse College and back in just before World War I and started bringing up students. And Martin Luther King came 15 years after my great-grandfather passed away in 1929. I'm older now than my great-grandfather was when he passed away. If anybody's familiar in Simsbury or Floydville Road, that was where his house was and a lot of the other things. If anybody has a great interest in the knowing about tobacco and all the process, there's a yearbook of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 1899. There's a story about the growth of the tobacco industry that was written by him and Milton Whitey, the chief of the department. The Connecticut Trust for the Connecticut Explored magazine also put out a very nice article in the summer issue of 2011 on talking about my summer in tobacco. It did talk about Martin Luther King and other folks that worked on tobacco. And just in case, just because this is Big Papa.
That's great, John.
A few of his grandchildren are still alive. They're all in their late 80s now. And there's several of us great-grandchildren that are still around. And I'm so happy you folks have done this.
Great. Thank you for sharing, John.
You're welcome.
And we'll capture all of these links and suggestions for additional reading and follow up with everyone after this program with a link to the recording of this program and any of the other links in the chats and things that we can collect for you all.
There's one more thing about the tobacco industry. For some reason, I had the great fortune to have to go out and survey the wages for tobacco workers to establish the minimum wage for tobacco workers when I worked at the Connecticut Department of Labor. And I went to Colbro. My great-grandfather sold the American Symmetric Company to the Coleman Brothers, which is Colbro now. And the supervisor, Mickey, took me in and he introduced me to the vice president of Colbro. When he found out that I was the great-grandson of my great-grandfather, he gave me such a tour of the entire business. We went through the barns and he showed us how the women sewed the leaves together. I was overwhelmed at kind of early. Knew of the whole process, and in that whole process, I did meet one person who was an owner of a Molnight's farm, Emil Molnight, in I believe Simsbury or East Grand. I forget the town, but he knew my great grandfather. And thanks for saving all the barns.
May I speak to John Toomey, please?
Yes.
I co-authored the history of East Granby many years ago. It came out in the 80s.
Oh.
It's their official history book. And I was fascinated by Marcus Floyd. I put a lot about him and his tobacco growing because Floydville Road is actually in East Granby. Yeah. I'm glad to see you today.
Did you know my cousin, Dorothy Floyd Higgins?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Because the property was across the street from East Granby High School. There's still a tobacco bar in there.
Yeah, right.
Just to answer Mary's statement she put in the chat, is she said to remind folks that there is in front of the Simsbury Free Library, a Martin Luther King exhibit memorial on the letters that was made and actually just added to the Connecticut Freedom Trail last year. But we kind of didn't do the ceremony because of COVID, but we're hoping this fall to do an official ceremony with Simsbury Free Library to have it celebrated to be listed on the Connecticut Freedom Trail.
Yeah, and we are planning programs having to do with Martin Luther King and, the memorial there.
Excellent.
Thanks. And Aaron, I see you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, I'll just add a quick comment if I may. I'm not originally from this area. I'm from the Midwest, and most of my personal connection, if you will, to Dr. King was with family members that migrated from the South and spent time with him, kind of moving through some of the Midwest and movements there. My grandfather specifically, and for what it's worth, I think folks out here will find it interesting that when I first moved to Connecticut, my grandfather said, "Oh, Dr. King used to work in Connecticut and had some experience out there." And so I found it interesting that when I started to learn more about the history out here, but that was something that my grandfather had personally discussed with Dr. King was some of his experiences here in Connecticut. So for what it's worth, anecdotally, more to just lead to the development of who this great man was. I also, there are many preservationists on this call. I'm not a preservationist. I know many of you are probably already thinking through this, but I also too want to be careful when we talk about preservation of the tobacco fields of not romanticizing what it was. When I first moved out here, my office was in Windsor and oddly enough, right next to a tobacco field. And I remember seeing the men and women who still work those tobacco fields today. And it frankly wasn't a summer job I think most of us would want back then, nor today. And I just hope that that's not kind of lost in this discussion or in these memorials. This wasn't a fun gig. It's not like the summer jobs that we think of today and work at an ice cream shop or something. So I guess I just wanted to share kind of my family history and connection to that and just that thought. So thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. Yes, we are definitely aware of telling the full story. And my dad, since we're all sharing our personal connections to this, my dad grew up in Simsbury on Masako Street, and he thought that would be a good summer job, and I don't think he lasted 2 weeks. He said it was the hardest job of his life, and he's a hardworking man and did not stick around to do that job. So yes, there's much to the story to tell there.
Jane?
Yes.
Back in, I believe, 2013, whenever Todd finalized the Barnes project, and we had that gathering in Old Saybrook, there was a woman that gave a talk about the barns, and she talked about Martin Luther King and the tobacco beds. But I cannot recall her name, and maybe she would be another good source for information on Dr. Martin Luther King and Morehouse College.
Right, Brenda Malofsky.
Sure.
Yep. I think that's who you're referring to.
Sounds right.
Okay.
I just wanted to add, Mr. Toomey, I just wanted to thank you for having something to do with the wages, because I was the envy of my friends those 2 summers. I mean, and Aaron, to segue to what you were saying, it was very hard work. I mean, I would be in the fields crying and, you know, working, but I stuck it out. I did it. And I was, like I said, I was the envy of all my friends. I made so much money in those 2 years. And like I said, my brothers didn't even last, and I outlasted them. And my dad always said, "Yep, I knew she was going to do it."
Yeah, I remember driving up to one field in a state car with the state seal on the door, and the supervisor said, "Well, everybody just ran in the woods when they saw a state car, because I'm assuming they may have been illegal immigrants working there as well." And the white people that I got to speak to were some of the Polish people in the barns. And it was the silliest thing to do. We just walked up to somebody and said, "Hi, how much do you make?" And we'd write it down and go to the next person, "Hi, how much do you make?" And they basically ended up getting the minimum wage, which was $3.37 back in the mid to late 80s when I did the survey.
And I was a piece worker because I was fast. So I had to have a fast sewer on the other side of me. So my girlfriend that lived across the street, we worked on Saturdays and we cleaned up.
Oh, good. Yeah, that was a lot. That was hard work doing the sewing. And my dad worked tobacco when he was in high school, and he was very athletic. And he was one of the hangers that he would climb up through into the barn. And thankfully, he had that job because he wanted to go to the circus in June of 1944 or July of 1944. Oh, wow. And he had to work instead, so I'm here.
Okay.
Lucky.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
And Honor, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I'm Honor Lawler. I'm from the Trust for Public Land. We worked with Shippo on the actual purchase of the property. And I just wanted to, like, hearing these anecdotes are so, you know, inspiring and exciting, and seeing, you know, some of the pictures that I haven't seen before is really, really moving. So I would just encourage everyone to participate in the charrette and, you know, come to the table with your stories when it comes time, because this is a site that, you know, we want to tell the story here and we need your stories. So I'm so thankful that you're all here and excited about it. And we're so glad to play a little bit of a role here. So thanks for inviting me, Cathy, and we'll be talking soon.
Great. Thank you, Honor. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This was really a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Cathy, Todd, Deborah, and everyone who participated. Like I said, this recording will be made available to everyone, and I encourage you all to reach out to us and the Shippo for any further work on this project or others that you want to discuss with us. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Jane, could you and Chris stay on? I do want to talk to you about something else.
Sure.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, Deborah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. This was really great.
See you, Todd.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you all.